Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com. I want to talk about mid-side processing a little bit. This is going to be sort of a more technically heavy video, but I think as engineers in particular, we need to be technically savvy so that we can make the bridge between what we're doing on a technical level with what we're trying to do on a creative level. I also don't think it hurts to know these things as a producer, although I don't think it's quite as important. But I think it's still valuable information regardless. So mid-side processing is a misnomer. To understand what mid-side processing's intention is, we can say mid-side. The idea is that if we want to target things that are living exclusively in the phantom center of our stereo field versus targeting things that are living only on the sides, we can do that through mid-side processing, but it's not really that simple. So what is the phantom center? The phantom center is when both our left speaker and our right speaker are producing the same sound at the same time. Our brain gets tricked and can't figure out that it's coming from two different speakers, from two different directions. Instead, it sums it together and goes, oh, this is coming from the middle, because we're hearing the same thing at the same time. Now, if you've seen the null test video, you know that there's a very interesting property that exists when you have identical information. If it's flipped out of phase and then combined, it disappears, right? So let's say we wanted to isolate the things that are not living in the phantom center. How do we do that? Well, we take one of our stereo feeds, either the left or the right, and traditionally it's the right. We flip the polarity, and then we sum them together. And anything that was living in the center disappears. It's kind of cool. Let's demonstrate that real quick. So here's our beat. We've got a kick and a snare living exactly in the center, and then we've got a pad that's got some stereo spread. We've got some percussions that are living out on the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the polarity on the right side, and then I'm going to collapse the entire thing into mono. Check out what happens to the kick and the snare. Kind of cool, right? It disappears. It vanishes. There is no more kick and snare. So we can now just isolate the things that are living on the sides that way. But how do we get the mid signal? Well, as it turns out, there isn't really a good way to exclusively get the mid signal. Instead, we kind of fake it by just adding the left and right together. And what that does is that emphasizes the things that are living in the middle, and it simply decreases the level of the things that are living on the side because of our pan laws. However, that doesn't mean that they vanish. They don't go away. Basically, if we have something like a drum kit and we've got the kick and snare directly in the center, and we've got the hi-hat exclusively on the left, meaning nowhere else, 100% panned hard left, when we get our mid-channel sum, we're going to hear mostly kick and snare, but that left hi-hat is going to get moved into the center as well. So when we do mid-side encoding, we're actually taking all of the side information and putting it into the mid-channel at a lower level, 3 dB down from everything that was living in the mid. So it's really important to recognize that, because that means that when we start doing any kind of processing, we can process things in a way where we're not necessarily really isolating what we think we're isolating. The actual word for mid-side is some difference, because it's not really mid-side. Now, I'm going to demonstrate this in a boring technical way, but I've got the FabFilter Pro Q3 up here. This is an EQ, and if you right-click your band and go to stereo placement, it allows you to do mid-side processing. So I can select mid or I can select side. So I'm going to have my low band here be just on the mid channel, and I'm going to have my high band here be just on the side channel. Now, before I do any EQing, I'm going to have my signal be fed very, very cleanly here. I'm going to have a higher tone at 566 Hertz with a stutter gate, so it's beeping. And that's going to be panned all the way to the left. And you can see right there, pan all the way to the left. Then I'm going to have my mid channel, which is going to be a lower drone, 147 Hertz. And it's just going to be droning along in the center right here. Now, in theory, If I affect just the mid channel, I should be able to turn up and down this low tone, and we should be able to basically create like a volume knob, more or less. Let's try that. So far, so good. We were able to completely eliminate the center tone. But check out what happens if I start trying to do that on the side. Notice that didn't work quite as expected. Instead of turning down the side signal, in a way, it just kind of moved it into the center, and then it stopped working entirely, right? We lost about 3 dB of the signal, it moved to the center, and then the EQ stopped doing anything. What the heck? Well, that's because when we collapsed our signal to create our mid channel, we moved our left signal into the mid channel. So we actually are eliminating the beep on the left channel. We're just not doing anything for the beep in the mid channel. So when we're doing mid-side EQ, we have limitations. And those limitations typically fall within about 3 dB when we're cutting. Now, when we're boosting, something else kind of interesting happens. We end up getting some unique little phase properties. Let's take our hi-hat again, right? Let's say we want to brighten up our side information. So we're going to use mid-side EQ, and we're going to brighten the top end on the side. And that should brighten up the hi-hat. And it does. It'll work. The only thing is that we also now have hi-hat in the center channel. So we have a clone of the hi-hat, the exact same signal as the hi-hat living in the center channel, and now we're getting a brighter and brighter version of it on the left channel, and we're using EQ, which is changing the phase, right? So now the hi-hat living on the side is coming in at a slightly different timing and phase than the hi-hat in the center. So we're now getting a phase discrepancy. So they are now going to phase when we hear them in mono, but also we're going to hear that phase discrepancy. There's going to be this interesting sort of floaty quality that's going to start showing up if we start doing this. Like it's going to feel almost like the sides are starting to disconnect from the center signal, which is not always a bad thing. Sometimes that can be a cool effect. It creates this kind of ghostly image, but sometimes it's not what we want. So let's say that we're doing some mid-side EQ. We just want to be aware that if we start messing around with our side boosts too much, we're going to start getting that disconnected effect. Let me put on my EQ right here. Well, first I'm going to play this chorus actually, and then I'm going to explain why I'm EQing it, and then we're going to do that demonstration. So when I hear this, I feel like it sounds good, but I wouldn't mind it being a little fuller sounding. I think that the sub information could have a little bit more punch to it. I think that there's a little bit of harshness in the top end, and I think we can make slightly more interesting use of our stereo space when we have that really interesting choir in there, and also maybe spread out some of the top as well. So that's kind of what's going on with my EQing here. I've got mid-side EQing where I'm warming up the sides by boosting up a little 185. I'm also pulling up that choir tone a little bit at 700 Hertz. And then I'm also boosting up top end to kind of spread the top and make a bigger image. On the mid channel, I'm cutting a little bit of, where am I at here? At 8.6, which is where I found a little bit of that harshness to show up. And I'm also boosting a little bit of 55 Hertz to add some of that sub punch. That sounds pretty nice. Let's take that off. And then I'm doing a second layer of EQ. This is not mid-side, this is just regular EQ, but I'm just kind of gently rolling off a little bit of the super treble and then boosting up a little bit of the lower treble, just because I feel like the super treble sounds a little bit like crunchy. There's something about it that is a little harsh on the ear, but that primary treble range sounds pretty good. So before and after. I just have to be wary that anything that I'm doing here is going to affect the phase. So in boosts, I really have to look out for the phase. That's the main thing. So I'm going to start pumping up the 700 hertz stuff. I'm going to take it out of narrow Q mode too. I'm going to start just blowing it up. Now, the good thing here is, while there's all sorts of a mess of phase stuff happening here, in a way, our ear doesn't really care that much because a lot of what we're hearing on the sides is reverb, and reverb doesn't necessarily depend on phase coherency anyway, so we can kind of get away with it, actually, on this, which, you know, very convenient in that sense. The other thing, though, is that I'm not doing more than 3 dB of boost. Now, I don't know if this is scientifically correct or any reason for this, like if it's related to the pan laws, that 3 dB pan law thing, but I find that as long as I'm doing less than like 3 dB boost on my sides, I don't really notice too much of the phase discrepancies start to show up. I really only start to notice when we're over 3 dB. The other thing is, when we're cutting on the sides, we have to understand that what we're really doing is we're kind of moving things into the center. We're sort of center panning it. So if we have sub-material that's living on the sides and we're trying to get rid of it by using something like a high-pass filter on the side signal, for example. So let's turn this up to like, 200 hertz here and start getting the sub out of the sides. What we're really doing is moving it into the center. We don't even really notice any difference there because there's probably just not that much sub living on the side. But I see a lot of the times that people will do this with like monofolds. They'll try to take sub out of the side signal using like a monoizer kind of a low end thing. And to me, that almost never clarifies the sub in any way, shape, or form. Like, it's not particularly useful. I don't know why. I guess because people say, don't have stereo sub or whatever. People will see it necessary to like eliminate any sub that's in the stereo. That's just a thing that people say online. There's really no reason to like trim subtone out of the side unless it's like so dramatic living on the side that it just needs to be balanced better. And that's really the only reason to do it. Yeah, I think we're getting into rambly territory, so maybe this is a good place to stop here, but, just wanted to clarify what we're really doing with mid-side EQ and mid-side processing in general. All right, guys, if you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification so you get notified. Low-end guide, still free if you sign up for the WeissAdvice newsletter, so do that while this offer is still available. And lastly, you know what we say. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.